Well, this week's episode is going to be a little bit different, but we're still going to start with our question. And even that's going to be a little bit odd today for this episode. The question is, can poetry make us less crazy or even a little less so? Well, that's our question this week, and I'm going to stick with it, which means you are listening. You are listening to Poetry, Gossip, and the Pursuit of Pleasure with Dale Byron. That's me. And in this podcast, we explore creative and practical ways poetry can help us in our everyday lives, finding, as I like to say, little pockets of joy, sanity, and connectedness, I should say. Well, I recently published an article on a Medium. It's an online platform called Medium, and the publication is called Better Humans. And it turned out to strike a nerve, I think, with a number of people, and it's turning out to be one of the more popular things that I've published over the years. And at the heart of the article is this strange little question, which is, can poetry make us a little less crazy? Actually, the title was stated in the inverse or in the positive statement of that question, which was in a statement, the title was How to Use Poetry to Live a Better, Saner, and Happier Life. And the byline was What Reading a Million Poems Taught Me About Life. And I think I'm somewhere up in that range. I may be rounding up just a little bit, but anyway. Um, so with the best of intentions and hope, let's just soldier on with the article. I'd like to read it now. It goes and starts like this. I want to draw a line. I want to draw a line right down the middle of your subconscious, carving out two critical domains. The first domain is the everyday you. It's the you that exists before colliding with a poem or a story or phrase that captures your attention and interrupts your usual and typical patterns. The second domain is a very different you. It is the shifted you that comes into existence just after reading or hearing language that stops you in your tracks, language from which you can neither forget or retreat. Words that say something to you that you've never quite heard before. However, once these words enter your psyche, you realize they describe a truth you cannot deny, a truth you did not know you knew. The first domain is easy to describe since we spend most of our time there. It's safe and a comforting place. And yes, of course, it's also a bit boring at times because it's when we in the world are showing up pretty much as expected. We turn a door handle and the door opens. We sip a cappuccino and receive that beautiful, bitter, creamy taste. Or we greet a friend or a colleague and they greet us back saying something like, I'm fine. How are you? So, this domain is safe and comfortable because it reinforces the lion's share of our mostly unconscious beliefs and assumptions about the world, ourselves, and others. But there is also a wild and even dangerous shadow side to this first side or this first domain. Think of the strange expression, I've known you for so long, I have no idea who you are. What's the challenge here? Well, the same workable and often highly adaptive beliefs and assumptions about the world that we hold in our unconscious can suddenly turn on us, becoming hard and trampled like a yard. For example, the person we know so well at home or work can be the same person we no longer listen to because we already know who they are. So when they shift, change, and grow, we often can't see it. We look right past the person they've become, only seeing who they were, or at least who we believe they were. This kind of mental lockdown of the other person invariably causes alienation and damage to the relationship. Hint, we do this to ourselves as well, thinking of ourselves in stale, unimaginative ways. Or think of another poetically stated favorite quote of mine on this subject by the sage David Bohm, who once said, "The mind makes up the world, then claims it did not." The mind makes up the world, then claims it did not. Here again, the challenge is when our unconscious beliefs and assumptions speed right past being adaptive and helpful, careening into an unhelpful, even dangerous place of rigidity. We say to ourselves, listen, I already know how the world works. And from this perspective, we force others, the world, and ourselves into cramped, tiny, little explanatory boxes. By this, I mean small boxes of talent, faulty courage, insufficient capacities, and limited vision that keep us from making the moves and changes so critical to our happiness and success. Now we are ready to describe the second domain, the domain of breakthroughs and aha moments. This is the domain of surprise, pattern interrupts, and wake up calls. It's the domain of new insights, feelings, and seeing the world fresh again. It's the person we become just after exposure to artful words that stop us in our tracks, requiring us to pay with our most sincere attention. Which now brings us to the core point of this essay. Word for word, line for line, nothing beats good poetry as a stunningly beautiful and practical way to invite new insights and perspectives, inspire more courage, support creativity, and skillfully connect the dots of our dynamic lives and wildly changing world in more meaningful and harmonious ways. Well, let me jump out of the essay for just a second. In other words, help make us a little crazy, a little less crazy. Okay, back to the essay. I've witnessed these effects of poetry on people firsthand in so many people over the years, including young, old, and every other age, including CEOs, entrepreneurs, and all manner of professional types. My passion and specialty are helping people find ways and portals into the second domain of insight, perspectives, and the kind of aha moments that change lives, careers, and relationships. Yes, my work includes helping others find the right words, language, and poetry. And my job is also assisting others in getting past any kind of rarefied view of poetry toward a new way to understand what poems mean. So, what does a poem mean? It's the felt sense, really, in your body when you hear, read, or write it. It suddenly reveals that frontier part of you that you barely know. It's the creative spark. It's the aha moment. Its meaning is the sheer yes you feel when someone describes your inner landscape even better, even better than you've been able to explain it yourself. A good poem that has moved you means that you can say it means. It means what you say it means, excuse me. And the best poems never stop meaning nor making us feel more alive. Now, a little side note is that my own experience is you read poems multiple times, and each time, or often each time, you will find that there's a slightly different nuance, sometimes huge different meaning and depth of meaning that you'll get. So it's a vital, dynamic thing, this business of reading and writing poetry. Okay, back to the article. I've read a million poems, so you don't have to. Seriously, seriously. I know that not everyone will catch AOPS, which stands for Adult Onset Poetry Syndrome, although it is highly contagious. My job here is to simply to encourage you to discover your own few poems that help you become your most centered, inspired, and powerful self. Here are life lessons I've gleaned, gathered, and learned in 26 years of reading, teaching, performing, and loving poetry. They are my best answers to why to drag poetry into every nook and cranny of our lives. That would include our lives at home, work, and any other place you can imagine. And when I say imagine, I mean poetry as the poet Wallace Stevens bravely described it, as a force capable of bringing about fluctuations in reality. I love that. I invite you now, not so much to discover poetry, but to discover yourself and others, and the great other, meaning the world that poetry illuminates. When we open a great poem, we open our lives. Eureka! As you'll see, one of the most useful things to experience is to hear ourselves saying things we didn't know we knew. Again, these are those aha insights and moments upon which our success and happiness depend. Of course, if I do my job here, the names of potential poets scattered throughout this piece and at the end will serve as starting points for your journey with poetry. Side note, or your deepening journey with poetry. One last thing. Within these 39 lessons, I've walked thousands of miles. Now it's your turn. All I can say is good luck and watch out. Okay. Number one, to live an abundant and meaningful life requires each of us to tap into our inner plumber and poet. It means we need to balance our linear, logical, and technical self with our nonlinear, creative, and emotional self. Poems are perfect tools for rebalancing ourselves in these ways. For example, the great poet Walt Whitman had an effective way to deal with his inner contradictions. He once said, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." Reading great poetry helps us tease out which contradictions are necessary and which are self defeating. It's an important distinction. Number two, good poems help us remember our connections to self, others, and the great other all around us. Such poems are tiny machines for remembering themselves as well, which of course part of their wonderfully sneaky plan. Think of the word remember in a literal sense. It's an act of freshly constructing ourselves anytime we need to do so, which for me is often. What do you forget most often? You might try these poetic words attributed only as an African saying. Those who love you are fooled by mistakes. This is the saying. Those who love you are not, I'm sorry, those who love you are not fooled by mistakes you have made or dark images you hold about yourself. They remember your beauty when you feel ugly, your wholeness when you are broken, your innocence when you feel guilty, and your purpose when you are confused. Great words to keep handy. Okay, number three. Poetry has unique qualities that allow us to understand the world more fully and deeply. We humans often prefer to stand over the world rather than understand it. In this way, great poetry can make us both wiser and more humble. That's a combination we need now more than ever. So when the poet Christopher Fry says, "Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to face us everywhere," we suddenly understand our situation more fully. Number 4, good poems always leave room for the inexplicable with small secret compartments for the mysterious as well. I do not deny that a little scientific squinting at the world won't uncover new things. And there is that unique way we can cock our heads to experience those coveted aha moments through science, in other words. What we know by intrinsic feeling and what we know by extrinsic evidence need not be at odds. The head and the heart are perfect for dancing, made to sing together, ideal for collaboration, and perfect for a playful, joyous, sometimes called the soul for short. Number 5, the right poems are little concentrated projects for growth, helping increase our emotional and intellectual skills, or chops, as they say. Number 6, no other art form expires. Sorry, no other art form inspires the way poetry does. The poet Mary Oliver once said, "One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice." I would challenge anyone to say, there's never been such a moment in your own life, in your own life. And when that moment came for you, I hope you made someone proud. Hopefully, yourself. Number 7, my longtime friend and mentor, Brother David Steindl-Rast, says, "It's not happiness that makes us grateful, but gratefulness that makes us happy." And because a poem is any language that helps us and causes us to stop and pay attention, I call that short statement a poem. Poetry and gratitude are kindred spirits. Practice either, and you'll be wonderfully vulnerable to the other. Number 8, poems help humans work with loss and grief. And since no one is immune from loss and grief, and since one day we will always lose loss itself, we must keep just the right poems in our loss and grief first aid kit. I have suggestions if you need them. Number 9, good poems reveal whole systems at a glance, often showing what is occurring far upriver where the actual cause exists and before the dazzle of symptoms and effects downstream overwhelm, destroy, or discourage us. So, for example, when the poet Liesl Mueller said in a poem about storytelling, "Because the story of our life becomes our life," we begin to see the vast system of our lives, and we suddenly realize the new story that growth and change require. Number 10, when you read poetry, giving ourselves full permission, headlights on bright, our heart wide open, we come close to discovering something like our real or maybe even best self. Number 11, reading great poetry may be therapeutic at times, as when a story nails us right where we are and informs and heals us despite our often unwitting resistance and objections. Poems break through. Number 12, great poems help us imagine the world in new and fresh ways. That's why the poet Wallace Stevens named one of his famous poems, "Reality is an activity of the most august imagination." Have you ever thought of reality? Have you ever thought of reality as an activity? It is. The truth is, nothing new or better happens until first imagined. We don't just see reality, we write it at the same time. We are the playwright, director, and starring actor in the play called Our Life. Number 13, great poetry has a highly sensitive BS meter, goes off at the slightest detection. Just think of the poet Wendell Berry writing these words: be like a fox. Be like a fox who makes more tracks than necessary, some in the wrong direction. Yes, yes, doubt when necessary. Refuse to go along to get along. And don't believe everything you think just because it is your idea. Number 14, remembering what we did not know we knew is one of the primary functions of reading or writing poetry. Wisdom tucked so deep inside us that we never see it coming until it spontaneously arises as a full blown epiphany. So when a poet like David Wagner belts out, "Stand still, the trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost," you suddenly feel you know who is lost. Me, you, us. Number 15. Every poem we love includes a built in workshop for becoming the kind of person who can live inside that poem's meaning. Why else would you love it so? Number 16. Never worry about having to get a poem. After all, what we love is never a contest, and getting it right is always relative. Besides, once I was exposed to this line by the poet Wendell Berry. He said, "The mind that is not baffled is not employed." I never worried again about being confused. It is the precursor for a brilliant breakthrough. Number 17. If you read a poem and it does not connect with you, do one of two things: either toss it aside immediately or reread it again and again until something clicks. You can't get this one wrong. Trust me, you'll know. 18. Good poems are helpers. The best ones are short, surprising, and sustaining. Remember, even long poems have short stanzas. Just as an aside, I did a whole podcast on that little thing about poems being short, surprising, and sustaining, if you're interested. Okay, number 19, back to the article. Reciting poetry in the traditional sense puts people to sleep, including ourselves. Instead, poetry should be told, belted out, or acted out like any good story or slice of a story. This lesson is controversial. However, please trust me on this one. Monotone is especially dangerous for leaders who have minds that wander. That includes everyone. Number 20, casting yourself deeply into a good poem may be hazardous, as when the you that comes back from the poem is the kind of stranger that the new you can't help but love, that the new you, in other words, can't help but love. Number 21, inspiration often arises at the tiniest thread of a feeling or thought. We must hold such threads lightly so they do not break. Sometimes it means reading slow or fast, depending on what your devil is up to that day. 22. The most dangerous paths to take concerning poetry is to either express or repress yourself. If you repress poetry by refusing it, you risk going your entire life without hearing the one line that may make your life meaningful and worthwhile. If you choose to express yourself through reading poetry, you may experience a profound disappointment in not ever meeting your expectations or needs. Note, I believe this second danger is manageable and ultimately smaller and worth the risk. 23. The poet David White once described poetry as language against which we have no defense, to which I would add that neither do we want to defend ourselves from such language. White also claims that he gave up science for poetry because poetry was so much more precise, to which I say, ain't that something? 24. Notice how reading a good poem raises your heartbeat as you imagine an ending that will shock, delight, and surprise you. It works the same way when you write. That is, If you are not surprised at least a little by what you write, no one else will be either. Make your religion surprise. 25. A poem is one of the only art forms where the creator knows and directs the poem performer exactly when and how to breathe. 26. When we read good poetry, we cannot help but cohere around what is most fundamentally us. Why? Well, great poems we love, we make into ourselves. 27. A poem we love is open and spacious. The greatest poems invite us inside, providing lots of living rooms for the readers. Poet Wallace Stevens put it this way: I think that the artist's function is to make imagination theirs, and that he fulfills himself only as he sees his imagination become the light in the mind of others. His role, in short, is to help people to live their lives. Yeah, said Wallace Stevens. 28. Poems are the original, excuse me, do-it-yourself literature. As a reader, you've got to participate fully or nothing happens. Excuse me. 29. Too much clarity in a poem is an insult to readers. Too little is lonely and serves as a magnet for emails that begin by saying, thanks for submitting your work. However, we are afraid. So not too much simplicity and not too much complexity. Okay, let's continue. We're close to the end here. Number 30. Poems are jokes with serious punchlines. Here is a little poem that for me has multiple serious punchlines. It's called Druid Vow of Friendship and is anonymously attributed. It goes like this. I honor your path. I drink from your well. I bring an unprotected heart to our meeting place. I hold no cherished outcome. I will not negotiate by withholding. I am not subject to disappointment. 31. Poems are stories without the boring parts. Sometimes even a single phrase in verse tells a whole story. These few words from Naomi Shihab Nye, from one of her poems, says an entire stunning novel. She says it like this: before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside you, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. Now we can go 1,000 miles in that one line. Number 32. By the way, since language is the only tool we can't put down, better to get good with its wondrously strange characteristics and its many and various uses. In life, love, and career, those who think, talk, and write well win. 33. If a poem only means what we think it means, it will surely be a skinny and impoverished poem. 34. Good poems can help delight and even heal us because they don't need to. So when we find a poem that perfectly describes who we are and how we feel, we can relish in the delight of knowing that the poet was not trying to fix or change us. They don't even know us. And yet, the poet knows something universally true, which strikes us to the very bone. A good poem, number 35. A good poem, like a shark's belly, can digest anything, including old tires, joys, straws, fast food, insults, unbearable losses, and even corrupt politics. 36. Good poets do not plagiarize, they steal. It only fits that we steal this line from Ezra Pound, who I think took it from someone else. Full disclosure, many of the guidelines herein are haunted by the brilliance of William Stafford. I hope he approves. Lastly, look up and also buy William Stafford poems. They are magnificent. But I digress. Number 37, poetry, sound poetry, well timed and powerful poetry gives the gift of hope, not slim hope, not fancy hope, and not that we need a hero to save us kind of hope, but a real sustaining hope, including a down in the mud and grist of life hope, the type that is our kind and will not easily float away. This kind of poetry is especially powerful in the realm of politics. Number 38. Stafford was also right about the wonderfully sly, trickster nature of poetry. He said something like, half the time a poem says what it doesn't mean, and the other half, it means what it doesn't say. Number 39, last one. Poems are bifocals for the soul. Use them carefully, but as often as needed. Even if your soul has cataracts, poetry can help. Hopefully, one or more of these strange insights will help propel you toward the kind of poems you need to live a more aware, satisfying, and meaningful life. And as we're adding today, a little less crazy. To live the kind of life where you control for surprises, fresh insights, and new understandings anytime you want, anytime. Of course, you can't force greater awareness, but you can pickle yourself in ways that invite it. Here is your homework, only if you wish to accept the challenge along with the assignment. As an experiment, carve out a tiny bit of time each day to read a poem or two. A few of my favorite poets are listed below to prime your pump if needed. At some point, you may want to grab a journal and add a little bit more time to make a few notes about your life and work and whatever you need to write. A second approach is to keep a few poems handy for attitudinal reworks and healing. You'll figure it out. Just know your creative muscles and capacities will grow with each of these simple and fun tasks. Finally, please know that poems live delightfully outside the traditional realm of self-help and strategy. They are generally not trying to fix or change us, but instead thrust us into the second domain of fresh insight and perspectives, as we've already described. Good poems have a natural and unfettered approach. The whole idea is to take down your inner defenses, to let go of all that trying, to simply allow our heart and mind, and maybe even our soul, enough room to romp together, sniff down trails, one shoulder wide, and to discover what we need to learn. Good luck, and let me know how you do. And if you have ideas or questions, I just love ideas and questions. Okay, so, um, you know, we've come to the end of this episode. That's the end of the article. And if you're interested in the suggestions for the authors, many of which I've already suggested in the different ideas about poetry, you can find this essay online at medium.com, or write me and I'll send you one. So our whole subject today is, can poetry help make us a little bit crazy? And the positive inverse, of course, is, can it help us be centered? Can it help us heal? Can it help us grieve? Can it help us be a little more sane? Can it help us in all those ways? And yes, can it help us be a little less crazy? I think it can. I'm convinced it can. And maybe I'm, just speaking for myself, and that's all I can speak for. But I think if you'll give it a try, you will find that to be true. So, of course, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. I always love it. And as we end this episode, as I always say, thank you so much for your listening ear. You know, refer this podcast to others if you think they would enjoy it. Leave a comment, whatever. Anything that helps get out the word would be great and appreciated. And as I always say, until next time and next poems, please, please take good care of yourself.